Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Jen White. I'm the founder and executive director of Arise Immigration Services. And tonight is the second night in our three-part series, this mental health series that we're doing that will become an annual series for us. And so tonight's topic is my favorite. It's like practical tools we can use when working with clients, when interviewing with clients, when trying to advocate on behalf of clients who have been through pretty significant trauma. So last week, if you joined us, we discussed trauma basics and kind of like the science, like how the brain is impacted by trauma, that sort of thing. If you want the recording to that, let me know. And if you want the slides for that presentation, let me know. And then fast forward to next week, we'll do kind of an informal debrief session based on all the content we've talked about. A couple of us will share some of our own experiences working with folks who have been through trauma, just to get us all thinking about how we can all take care of ourselves, really. So Aimee, who I'll introduce in a second, will present tonight, and then I'll stick around to debrief if anyone wants to, particularly since we'll be talking about tactics that maybe you've seen used before, or maybe this will prompt some ideas based on the cases you've worked on already. So I'll stick around afterward. So I introduced Aimee more formally last week. You all know me, I'm an informal person. I'll keep it more concise tonight. So I'm thrilled to have Aimee educating us tonight for many reasons. We were just talking about this. She has a really unique specialty. She's a licensed clinical social worker who opened up a private practice to focus on conducting mental health evaluations for immigration proceedings. So what I love about that is she has a real working knowledge of the legal component of this work, in addition to, the mental health piece and all of the other pieces that we work with in this field. So that's super valuable, and I think that makes her perspective and the things she has to share with us even more valuable. So Aimee, I will turn it over to you. Thanks for being here.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me again. So as Jennifer mentioned, today we'll be talking about the more nuts and bolts techniques of how to work with survivors of trauma. And we'll be talking about a lot of things in relation to that. First, we're going to kind of go through the mental health evaluation process as I conduct it. So you also have an idea of what clients would go through when they go through a mental health evaluation for their immigration case. We'll then transition to trauma-informed interviewing techniques, which includes building rapport, the actual interviewing portion. As always, I'm a social worker. I have to give resources. We'll have some resources at the end and then some Q&A. As before, we'll be talking about issues related to domestic violence, sexual violence, torture, whatnot. So if needed, take steps to ensure your own well-being, even if it's stepping away, grabbing a glass of water, whatnot. So people do the mental health evaluation process differently based on their practice. Some people do one appointment. I tend to do two. And from end to finish, referring to a mental health provider starts with the initial referral, and the client may self-refer. Their immigration attorney may say, hey, call one of these people because they can help you with this. Or the immigration attorney may reach out directly saying, hey, I have this person. Would you be able to assist them? Can I have them give you a call? So the referrals can come in a variety of different ways. If you were to refer someone for a mental health evaluation, there is some documentation that tends to be helpful based on the type of case. If it is a U visa, the U visa certification is very helpful, especially if it includes a copy of the police report. So we know it's already been documented, it's already been submitted. If it's an asylum case, the I-589, if there's been an RFE or credible fear interview, any sort of document, any witness statements, medical records, whatever you may have that you think would be helpful for the evaluation process, and gives more information about the case. In my practice, the clients call me instead of me calling the clients. One, for ethical reasons, I'm not trying to recruit clients, but also it ensures that they are in a place where they are safe and able to talk. And then there's the initial appointment. And in my practice, the initial appointment is, okay, we're going to go through everything in your life from the time that you can remember to the present day and see how far we can get. My initial appointments last about 2 hours. And between the first and second appointment, that's when I review the documentation that I've been provided. The reason I don't review it beforehand is because I don't want to be swayed in my questioning based on what's already been documented or what's already been said. That allows me to do an evaluation that's a little bit more thorough and not kind of guided by what people think is important or not at that point. I will then write the draft of the report, the very rough draft, just getting everything on paper. And then during the second appointment, that draft kind of structures the conversation with the client. We literally go through the draft, correct what's wrong, fill in the gaps, make edits where they need to be to make sure that we have a complete story. If the client is interested in treatment, I think I mentioned last week that for many people, this evaluation process is almost like a gateway to therapy. It's the first time they've talked to a mental health professional. And they may feel some benefit from it. They may understand better kind of what the difficulties they've been experiencing. And so I think probably about 30% of my clients will request actual therapy referrals after the second appointment. And then I finalize the report. So I will send the draft of the report to the attorney for their review to make sure everything is factually correct. If there's any inconsistencies that I didn't catch in reviewing the declaration, the I-589, and other documentation, I ask them to get back to me, and then I circle back to the client to kind of clarify what happened. And it's happened where sometimes it's me and my misunderstanding, or it's on the attorney's side. Maybe the client was thinking about something else. There may have been translation issues. There's a lot of reasons for inconsistencies with the report and the documentation that they've been gathering. And once the attorney feels comfortable with the report and any grammar edits or whatnot are made, I sign off on the report. Now, the reason why I do 2 instead of 1 interview is that usually during the second interview, the client knows me. They're more comfortable and they will talk more freely about things. It allows us to go deeper into issues that maybe we didn't have time to get to the first appointment. But also, as I'm writing, I always have questions of different things that may have been missing, may have been left unsaid, or different details that may be helpful for the case. And of course, it allows us to ensure accuracy. So trauma-informed interviewing skills are really important for anyone working with survivors of trauma, especially those with immigration cases. Most immigrants seeking immigration relief have to talk about things that are very intimate, very shameful, very painful multiple times throughout the process. And each time they talk about the traumas that they've endured, there's a chance of re-traumatization. And skills for interviewing trauma survivors can really help mitigate this risk. It's also important to know that the traumas related to their immigration application are likely not the only traumas that they've endured throughout their life. One of the ways I've learned to capture this is by using screening forms ahead of time before meeting with clients. And I have some attorneys who will do this as well. So instead of just focusing on traumas, asking about what happened, why they fled their country, I know attorneys who will use the adverse childhood events form, which asks about childhood trauma or a more general trauma screen. So going into those appointments, you kind of have an idea of where some sensitive spots may be throughout the person's life, which may or may not be relevant to the case, but may affect how they react or may provide some additional information regarding the reaction, kind of what they went through later in life. Sometimes people will feel comfortable marking stuff on paper, but not be able to bring it up in session. And when going through that second appointment that I usually have with clients, that's where I tend to bring it up. Like, I noticed this on paper. We didn't talk about it. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And then they'll feel more comfortable opening up. Sometimes the opposite is true. They'll mark no, 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 no on all the forms. My childhood was great. And then we start talking and they just dive in. So giving clients the opportunity to kind of know or identify their traumas in different ways can be really helpful, especially if they have difficulties verbalizing them, or if you just go on paper, like maybe they were too ashamed, maybe somebody was helping them, and knowing that things might not be documented completely. So trauma-informed interviewing has a lot of benefits for legal teams. I think for some groups, there's a fear that it's going to take away the like kind of unbiased approach, that it may take longer, but really it can make your work a lot more efficient. Using empathy as a tool is a great tool for establishing rapport with your clients, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. It allows you to ask more effective questions, and giving the client the time and space to fully answer those questions. As we talked about in the first session, when a client talks about trauma, especially if they haven't had therapy to process it, they're going back in their head, reliving it, and coming back and telling you about it. That takes time. And a lot of times when clients, you have those long pauses, that's one of the reasons. Another reason may be shame, kind of working up the courage to talk about it. But a lot of times there's a lot going in their head that they're reliving before they're able to come back and tell you about it. Trauma-informed interviewing will enable you to better identify gaps in information important to the case. It'll also help you to be aware of the emotional reactions that you or your clients may experience before, during, and after an interview, and prepare yourself for that. And it's also going to help you to pace the interview so the client's not emotionally raw at the end of the session. Regarding kind of better identifying gaps in information, I had a client recently for a hardship waiver and didn't talk about any sexual abuse during the appointment. And when I went through and read her paperwork, as I was kind of preparing the draft of the report, I noticed that she had noted it in two places, both childhood sexual abuse and then when she was a little bit older. And during the appointment, she also reported being afraid of putting her kids in daycare until they were able to verbalize their experiences. And so I felt like something was missing, and it wasn't really conscious. It was just one of those situations where like something's missing here, because most people aren't that afraid to put their kids in daycare. And then when I asked her about it, she started talking about the childhood sexual abuse and everything that she had gone through and the reasons why she had never told anyone before. And it made a lot more sense, and it made for a lot stronger report for what would happen if her spouse, who was a primary source of emotional and social support for her, would have to leave on multiple levels. So sympathy and empathy can get interchanged, but they're two different things. One isn't better than the other. They both have their roles, I believe, in life and in society. So sympathy is the feeling that you care about or are sorry about someone else's trouble, grief, or misfortune. And sympathy really can help motivate people to do good, to donate money, to volunteer in a variety of ways. In trauma-informed interviewing, empathy is going to be our best source of support. And that's the act of perceiving and understanding, experiencing, and responding to the emotional state and ideas of another person. Empathy is what's going to enable you to mentally and emotionally put yourself in someone else's shoes and see the world from their perspective. And in order to do this, we have to be able to examine and be aware of our own experiences, attitudes, and beliefs, especially as related to the facts of the case that you may be working on. And the awareness of your own biases and reactions can also better prepare you and enable you to monitor them while you're interacting with your client. Because if we're not aware of our own biases and reactions, and we're trying to be empathetic, it can actually impede that ability and be an impediment to building rapport. Many survivors of trauma are very in tune with others' reactions, and even just the hint of judgment or disbelief, or they can see when people are becoming triggered or overwhelmed by the information they're sharing, and all of that can shut them down and result in them withholding information due to either feeling it's unsafe or maybe feeling that you're not going to be able to handle it. Empathy is operationalized in a lot of different ways. In trauma-informed interviewing, it's really listening to your client using all of your senses. So watching their posture, eyes, subtle changes in body language, fidgeting. I had one client who was an asylum seeker. She was, I think, in her early 20s. And she was talking about this horrendous abuse that she had experienced back in her home country. And during the 4 hours I met with her, because I happened to be just 1 4-hour session, she went through, I think, 5 napkins and just ripped each one of them apart as she was talking and rolled them into little balls as she was talking. That was the way she kind of tried to keep herself emotionally stable. But it told me a lot about her emotional state, the impact it had on her, and just what a struggle it was for her to even verbalize half of what she had been through. Empathy will help you to look at events through your client's eyes, which is going to help you a lot when you're interviewing them and helping them prepare the declaration, and also enable you to better validate your client's experiences and perspective. One thing that's interesting about empathy in this practice of trying to put ourselves in our client's shoes and experiences, it can also help you to preemptively answer any questions that they may have about the immigration process, even down to like the first appointment. Having someone come to your office or meeting someone somewhere where it's new to them, they may not speak the language, whatnot. Thinking about that experience of even coming to a law office from their perspective will enable you to better prepare them. It's going to enable you to let them know, like, look, you're going to, like, here's where you can park. Here's where someone should drop you off. There's this person at the front desk. This is how you interact with what you ask them for. I'll come down or someone will meet you, kind of really step by step walk them through processes to help alleviate any anxiety that they may have. And that's going to help them feel a lot more confident in their abilities and also confident in the process. Also, it's going to help you be able to read and mitigate emotional reactions during the interview. It can help you verbalize experiences that they may not yet be able to do themselves. Statements like such as that was overwhelming for you, or you felt really powerless, just kind of summarizing their experiences can help them continue with the interview without becoming emotionally overwhelmed by it because they know they've been heard and seen. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And also, these cases aren't clear cut. And so domestic violence, child abuse, rape, other types of assault can really provoke strong reactions in people. And remembering to look at situations through our client's perspective keeps us from defaulting, seeing somebody as all bad or as all good, because no one's one or the other. And especially if it's interpersonal violence, there's a lot of mixed emotions there for people. Many clients feel shame or like they're doing something wrong when speaking out about abuse that they were subjected to by spouses or family members. They may feel shame about breaking the cultural norms or violating religious beliefs or just blame themselves in general because that's what they were told. It wasn't their fault. And so it's important to be able to understand and to acknowledge and normalize these conflicting emotions and sometimes verbalizing them as well. Telling someone, if you see someone struggling, saying, I know it's really hard to talk about your father and what he did to you because he's also your father and you also loved him, can really help lower a client's defenses, especially if they've been trying to kind of justify his behavior or minimize the abuse that they subjected them to. So before we talk, so in talking about empathy, one of the things I recommend that people do when they're about ready to meet with someone, especially for the first time, is looking at their environment through the client's eyes. What can be done to increase your client's level of comfort? And that's down to thinking like, what's the atmosphere in your office? Is it intimidating? Is it prestigious? Is there security? What's the atmosphere of the room where we'll be conducting the interview? Is it a conference room? Can they be sat by the door? Do they need to see the door? Is it in a more intimate office setting, which may be better for some people? Remembering the age and physical abilities of your clients when you are planning a meeting is important. If your client is a child or has children, having a place where there's crayons or coloring sheets or fidgets or even a foam basketball or soccer ball can be helpful. And so really thinking about the client's experience as they walk in. For the people who are doing the interviewing of the client, is it possible to dress down that day? If that would be helpful. But for some cultures, no. They want to see their attorney dressed up. They want to see a professional. Children, that may be more intimidating. And then even thinking through how many people will be in that first meeting if you have a larger team and who is really necessary. These experiences are overwhelming for a lot of clients, and having then only the necessary people, especially as discussions about trauma begin, is really important. And I recommend for the first interview, if possible, that it be kept shorter, especially if they're just meeting you or meeting their legal team. Try to keep it to an hour or less. Focus on introductions, rapport building, basic paperwork, scheduling, stuff like that. And then the next appointment, and then setting up a plan for the next appointment. So with building rapport, and the only way you can really effectively work with your client, as many of you all know, is establishing a partnership. And that can be hard for many reasons. First is defining roles. People may see you or your role in a lot of different ways, but it's important to tell the client and remind the client that they're the expert on their story. They're there because of their story. You may be the expert on law or the immigration process or some other aspect that you're using to help their case, but they are the real experts because it's their story and it's their story. And their story is why they are there. And it's important to be very clear about their role in correcting if you're mistaken, especially if it's related to their case, as well as asking questions if they're confused. Periodically reviewing any information you've gathered from them, with them is important, and actively requesting their feedback, corrections, and clarifications. And the reason why I'm going so much into this is that there's a lot of barriers to clients engaging with their legal teams. This can be due to many reasons. In a lot of countries, there's a power difference. You don't question, including just asking general questions to those in power. You kind of accept the information that you're given. And even if you don't quite understand it, you don't ask. I even had this experience in Ecuador with medical doctors. Medical doctors in Ecuador, when I lived there, are a lot more kind of authoritative. Like, this is the medication you take. We're done here. And when I would ask, do I need to be worried about side effects? Are there any limitations? And they were all kind of taken aback, like, why are you asking me these questions? I gave you the information. This is what you go with. And so actively talking to clients about how the work is a partnership, how the role is to make sure that what you have is correct is really important. Perceived social status can be based on age, gender, race, ethnicity, nationality, education, or socioeconomic status. So these are things that are really important to kind of keep in mind, especially if you're finding that the client's story is changing or you're having difficulties getting information out of them. It's important also to talk about any elephants in the room. So you may come across clients who will talk about the trauma, but not talk about the trauma. And especially if the trauma is really shameful or there's a lot of verbal abuse or bad language that they were subjected to. And clients feel comfortable with this for many reasons. I've had male clients who didn't want to say these words to me or in front of me because I was female. I've had other clients because I was considered a person of authority in their eyes. And it's important to address these issues directly and acknowledge it and normalize it and letting them know, look, I know it can be hard to use this language in front of others, but it's important to do so because it shows the severity of the abuse that you were subjected to. And letting them know that it's also good practice to do so here where you feel more comfortable, because there's a chance that the asylum officer or the judge is also going to ask. It's also important to let clients know that nothing they will say will shock them, if that's the case, or the judge. And so it's telling their story as it happened to them will not cause anyone else any stress, but will only help them. That's one second. There may also be concerns about expertise. Sometimes when there's volunteer attorneys or representatives, clients may not fully trust you or may not feel like they're getting the appropriate representation, and talking to them about it. Like, I am an attorney. There's an expert immigration attorney that reviews all my work to make sure it's correct. Like, do you have any questions about the process? If you feel like there may be barriers based on gender, regarding when working with sexual assault survivors, asking them if it would be easier if they limited the number of people in the room, or if there was a female who could be asking the questions, or maybe there needs to be a differently gendered interpreter. in communities where there are small, very tight-knit ethnic groups or groups of national people from different countries, it's also important to ensure that they don't know the interpreter outside of the case and that they feel comfortable with them. So there's a lot of ways that power dynamics can impact the information that we get, but also the client's engagement with the process that it's important to be aware of and to know. For a special tip on working with minors, it's really important to understand what they know about being there, what they were told about the process, what they were told about meeting with you, to kind of see their perspective. I've worked with a lot of clients who were in their early teens, even late teens, who never really knew why they fled their country. They knew they were in danger, but their parents had held a lot of information. And that helped me kind of understand the dynamics of the family. And also, these clients had a fear of uncertainty. They didn't know what was going on because the family always withheld stuff. So making sure that the client with you knows what's going on and has the freedom to ask any questions and knows that you'll answer them is very important. And then also pivot when needed. And the pivoting is if you find a barrier that you can't overcome on your own, speaking to a mentor, bringing in someone else to assist with interviewing, making sure that the client feels as comfortable as possible in order to get the information you need to proceed with the case. So with each interview, I'd like people to think of it as kind of like framing the interview. There's things we do before, at the beginning of each appointment, within each appointment, and at the end of each appointment that can really assist survivors of trauma. For anyone, especially trauma survivors, and especially for people who may be newer to the United States, anxiety of the unknown can become overwhelming very quickly. Clear communication, more than you would probably give to anyone else, really helps to alleviate the client's anxieties because they know what to expect. When I talk to individuals the first time, in addition to running through all the basics of how the evaluation takes place, what forms they fill out, platforms, I tell them, like, we'll be talking about your entire life story from the beginning to the end. And there's nothing you need to be prepared with. I'll just be asking you a lot of questions. And if there's anything that you're not ready to answer yet, you let me know. We table it to the next session. That alleviates a lot of their concerns of being pushed too fast and pushed too much. So let them know what to expect. And that also enables them to mentally and emotionally prepare for interviews with you that may be more trauma focused. At the beginning of each appointment, review the plan again. They may get there and just knowing step by step what's going to happen will help them feel more comfortable and get settled in, and reminding them that they can take a break at any time. Or if a topic becomes too overwhelming, like I said, if it's not urgent, table it to the next session. And then also always ask your client what questions they have. I put ask if. I don't ask I don't ask if they have any questions. I always ask what questions they have, because that kind of sets the expectation that they're going to engage. And even if they don't have any questions, that's fine. But I'm usually asking a lot of questions, and I want them to have the opportunity to also ask questions and kind of normalize the fact that that's okay. Within each appointment, it's important to take time to transition the client to new topics, even within the same interview. And that applies for trauma-related tasks and non-trauma-related tasks. This is something that I will get going during the interview and sometimes forget, and it always kind of smacks me in the face. When going through somebody's declaration, when going through someone's story, right before you get to the point where you start talking about the traumatic content is an excellent time to pause, check in with the client to see how they're doing, and ask if there's anything in what you all reviewed or what you've all talked about that was wrong, that needed corrected, or was missing any information. One, they're still thinking pretty clearly at that point, and it gives them a chance to reflect back. But it also kind of gives them a chance to breathe, because they know and you know that the next step is going to be a little bit more difficult. And then asking them, we're going to be talking about when you were kidnapped by the gangs or when the Taliban came to your town. Are you ready for that? Most likely they're going to say yes, but at least they have the power to say yes or no, and they're giving their consent, and it gives them time to emotionally and mentally prepare themselves for the next part of the interview. And the same at the end. If you get through a difficult part in their life story, letting them know, okay, I think we're good. Like, you've done a really good job. I think we're going to stop there for today. Is there anything that you think we missed, or is there anything else you think we should know before we transition to the next topic, whatever that may be? So it's kind of putting bookends on part of the interview and giving the client a chance to step back, reflect, and regroup before transitioning on. And then also letting them know at the end of the interview and at the end of each section, like, thank you for those details. Like, you've done a really good job. For the last part of the session, we're going to take care of some authorizations or whatever little things that still need to be wrapped up prior to the end of the appointment. And then at the end of each appointment, what's the plan for the next appointment? When will you meet? What time? What will you be covering during that appointment? So it requires you to think ahead and not take the appointments one by one. So you're able to let the client know and prepare emotionally and mentally for the next line of questioning. Even if we're going to review your declaration again to make sure we have everything correct, that's fine. But as long as they know ahead of time, they can usually better prepare themselves. So during the interviewing, it's important to slow down your pace of questioning, especially when dealing with traumatic content. Slowing down the questioning and giving those clients the space to answer allows them to really process what they went through. And like I mentioned before, come back and verbalize it. Using short, direct, open-ended questions is also really helpful. Complex questions or questions within questions can get really confusing and can also result in them skipping over important details of their story. Sometimes just what happened next is all you need for the client to continue telling their story. Especially in the initial stages of the declaration. I feel during the first appointment, a lot of times I'm just asking what happened next and what happened next. And you can kind of go through their story as it comes to their mind. And then later on, go back and start picking things apart. If you need to clarify information, there's two things. One is definitely avoid repeating close-ended questions and attempts to verify, because that can make people defensive, or they may change their answers, especially if they're minors, because they feel like they're not saying the right thing. But also blame yourself. I got a little mixed up. Like, I know you told me your grandmother said bad things about your mother because she was Indigenous, but I'm a little mixed up. Can you explain a little bit more about that to me? Using yourself as the reason for clarification will reduce any defenses that they may have, especially if they have a history where people didn't believe them, or people challenged them, or people shamed them because of what they were saying. Also, sorry about that. Be specific in your word selection and use your client's words, especially as you're reading a declaration back or trying to obtain more detail about incidences. For some people, a vehicle, car, truck, a vehicle we may use for car and truck. For other people, that may be completely different. I was way back when I was in undergrad, there was a court case, and it was a domestic violence case that was immigration related. But there was a huge problem because of translation in that aspect, where someone said vehicle and it was translated as truck, even though it was a car. And it brought up concerns regarding whether the person was being truthful, even though she was. So it's really important to try to use the client's words as specifically as possible to make sure that we have the correct understanding and the correct details. Also, notice pauses or spaces in what is being said or not being said. Sometimes there's two things that tend to happen. One, we feel like we're hitting a wall and they just keep repeating the same thing over and over again. You don't understand why, even though you're asking different questions. Or they start talking about something else. Or they go through their story, but it's not quite making sense. These pauses or spaces or gaps when they're telling their story are really important, even if you may not think so at the beginning. I was working with a client who was very general. It's like kept talking about how because she and her family were indigenous. Her father's family mistreated them and called them bad names. And essentially that was it. And she kept repeating the cycle, probably like 3 or 4 times. And I was just observing this interview. I wasn't even part of it. And after the 4th time, after noticing that each time before she said something, like she would pause before she said a certain phrase, I asked if I could ask her a question. And I simply asked, did any of these people sexually assault you? And she said yes. And it turned out that her uncles and his sons, because she and her family were indigenous, basically looked at them as property and severely sexually abused them. After she was able to open up about that, she was able to open up with other parts of her story. But because she wasn't able to say that, she couldn't get any further in the initial story that she was telling us. And like I just demonstrated, ask about suspected abuse in a gentle but direct way. If I would have just asked, did anything else happen? I may have not gotten an answer. But asking, did any of these people ever sexually abuse you? She was able to say yes. And sometimes, and it's different for attorneys than a therapist, but sometimes being able to ask sensitive questions in a yes or no way is all that's needed to be able to open up and give the person can give themselves permission to talk about it because the cat's already out of the bag. And also use various techniques to elicit information. Some people, as I mentioned before, can write down or check yes or no on screening measures. Some people can write about their experiences. Some people can, which I mean, children especially can draw. Sometimes people's pictures are helpful, or maps or whatnot. Asking someone, okay, here's a room. Can you draw me where this person was at the time of this torture? May help the person be able to better envision what happened or better remember the details of what happened, especially if they're having a hard time verbalizing it. In addition, I think, especially with survivors of sexual abuse, it depends on your case and how detailed you need to get. I want to go back to the asking about suspected abuse in a very gentle but direct manner. When survivors of sexual abuse, at least with those I've worked with in Central America, a lot of times it'll be they touched me or things really general. They raped me. If you need to know the details, you need to ask the details. Like, did they rape you vaginally, anally, orally? Did they rape you with objects? And a lot of times they'll say yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. But them telling you of their own free will is going to be really difficult just due to the intense shame. But you saying those words first lets them know that it's okay. And that it's not going to shock you. It's not going to surprise you. When you think of an interview, especially interviews focused on trauma, I tend to think of it as a bell curve. When you start an interview, it's small talk, maybe going over the plan for your appointment, kind of getting settled in. You want to keep the more trauma-oriented work more towards the middle. So declaration, if you're working on the declaration for the whole thing, kind of working on the hardest parts towards the middle, because you need time to decompress beforehand. And that's not only for your client, that's for you. I kind of look at it like a therapeutic bell curve. That prevents the client and you from leaving these interviews emotionally raw, and also helps give them the confidence knowing that they can talk about this, and they're probably not going to feel great afterwards, but it's not going to be as overwhelming as they probably thought it was going to be. With the small talk at the end of the session, always acknowledge the work that was done. Let them know that what they told you was helpful, like you guys are making good progress, whatever it may be. Talk about the next appointment's plan. And what I always recommend is kind of talking about, what are your plans for the rest of the day? What is going on for your kids at school? Do you guys have any plans for the weekend? Anything that can kind of help reorient them to the here and now is really helpful in getting them out of their head. Because what's going to happen a lot of these times, especially if I could mention if they haven't had therapy to really process it, is that they're going to be very caught up with their head with thoughts, memories, emotions, physical sensations, whatnot. We can't take all of that away, especially in these type of settings. But what we can do is kind of help get them thinking more about the here and now and what's coming up to kind of get them out of their head. So that's really helpful and that's really powerful. And I usually spend 10, 20 minutes afterwards. Just to let you all know, and something that you can also let clients know too, if you felt comfortable and it was within your scope, is they will probably not feel great for a couple of days after these appointments and may experience like increased thoughts, nightmares, headaches. Some people feel like sick, whatnot. And so recommend like whatever helps you kind of get through this stuff, whatever helps relax you, whether it be a walk, whatnot, try to do it today. After these appointments for your clients is a time for self-care if possible, not always possible, but whatever helps them kind of refocus on the work they're doing now and their hopes for the future, try to encourage them to take those steps. So emotional regulation is related to your client, but also related to yourself as well. In these appointments, you need to be aware of your own reactions. And it's not for two reasons. One, it allows you to know what you kind of need to be aware of and what your client may see. But it can also give you insight into your client's emotional state or reactions. If you're feeling frustrated because your client's avoiding a topic or being resistant, they may be feeling pressured, or they may be feeling ashamed, or be feeling overwhelmed, or feel like there's judgment. Like if you notice kind of like you're getting frustrated, or your questioning's getting faster, or you're feeling more tense, it's a good time to take a step back. Okay, what's going on with me? What's going on with the client? Because then you can verbalize it. You can let them know, I know these things are hard to talk about, or even asking, what comes up for you when I ask these questions? Like, I know they can't be easy. How does it feel? How does it feel to talk about these things? And sometimes just taking that step back, acknowledging that the client's not wanting to answer the questions for whatever reason, and that's difficult to go through this process, give them space to verbalize it. And sometimes they're able to go back and then start actually talking about it, because there's no longer this emotional barrier, this defense mechanism that you're pressing up against. Some people are scared to acknowledge clients' emotions. Someone starts crying, becomes overwhelmed. People are sometimes afraid, like, if I acknowledge this, it's going to open up a bag of worms and I'm not going to know how to control it. What I recommend is using empathetic wrap-up statements. You're acknowledging what's happened and kind of helping them summarize it. And so statements such as, like, you were really scared you were going to lose your son and it's so hard to talk about it now. But I'm really happy and that you're telling us, and I'm really sorry that you went through it, is enough to let them know they've been seen and heard, that you see the difficulties they're experiencing. But not also opening up, can you tell me more? Or how are you feeling right now? Or how does it, like, you're not going into a therapeutic process, but you're letting them know that they're seen. I mean, statements such as, you went through a lot in Honduras or the country of origin, and that no one should have to go through. Like, thank you for trusting us with your story. A lot of times when people are struggling, especially in front of others, like, they don't want to become more upset. But like I mentioned, knowing that they're seen and knowing that they're respected despite the difficulties they're experiencing can be really powerful and can help them pull it together a lot of times. Monitor the pace of the interview for your client. So if you feel like your client's becoming too overwhelmed or starting to really disconnect, almost dissociate, or you're a little concerned about how they're doing, ask if it's okay to take a break. And you can blame yourself. Like, you know what? We've been talking a long time. Like, would you like a glass of water? I'm a little thirsty. Let's just take a break. Let's regroup and then let's see what else we can work on today. And that's okay. And it's funny because there's like no magic glass of water, but the act of drinking water actually kind of helps mitigate that fight or flight response and can help bring that prefrontal cortex back online, which will help them speak a lot more fluidly about what they're experiencing, be able to verbalize better their experiences. And sometimes, though, it may be too much too soon. Like, if your client's really struggling, you may need to try to get them connected to a therapist where they're able to process some of that before going back into their story. And it's really important, you may have to remind them of the purpose. it's hard for them to have to relive these moments in their life, and letting them know, look, I know it's hard and you're doing a really good job in helping us prepare for your case. And letting them know, like, this is a very unique situation that is very painful, but can also have a chance of increasing your safety and stability here. So reminding them that they're going through the story, they're going through the pain, they're having to go through the memories for a purpose that ultimately could help them is important, because it also gives them a sense of agency. So here are some of the resources that I recommend for working with clients. I mentioned getting people connected to resources, evaluators, and stuff like that. So I wanted to provide some that would enable you all to do so. So if you were looking for a mental health clinician to provide an evaluation, these are two websites that are good. These are paid directories. So people, including myself, pay to promote our services on there. It tends to be a fairly good clearinghouse, but of course it doesn't cover everybody in your state who may be doing this. And so it is a good place to start. But what I do recommend, if you're ever working with a new evaluator, is vetting them, like making sure they're licensed in your state or authorized to work in that state based on current licensure laws, asking how long they've been doing this, the average length of their reports, the average length of evaluation time, number of appointments, and stuff like that. If their appointment length or their total evaluation time is less than 2 hours, that would be a red flag for me. And if they refuse to give you an average length of their reports, that would also be a red flag, or like a range. Like, I can tell somebody easily, my reports range from 12. I just finished one of 30 pages. It's usually closer to like 15 to 17. And because I've been doing this a long time, so I kind of know what it is. And the more complicated the case, the longer the report tends to be. If you have clients who are survivors of domestic violence or victims of domestic violence and are interested in resources, the Domestic Violence Support Hotline is a good resource. Many domestic violence programs throughout the United States provide free individual or group counseling, individual counseling with translation including, for survivors of domestic violence. And there are some that also provide that similar support for survivors of sexual violence. Sexual Assault Support Hotline is a good resource. The Mental Health Crisis Line, of course, if you have a client who's really struggling. And how I frame the mental health crisis line is that if they need someone to talk to and it's late at night, or they just need to get whatever they're feeling off their chest, like, that's a good place for them to call. And if the client is interested in mental health care or in need of medical care, there are federally qualified health centers. Federally qualified health centers don't care if you're documented or undocumented, and it's sliding scale. So what tends to happen for a lot of clients is that when there's a crisis, they go to the ER. This can medical and mental health, and this can kind of mitigate that. And many of the federally qualified health centers also have an integrated medical and mental health care model, which is really nice for the clients. And the physicians there tend to be a little bit more skilled and a little bit more comfortable in treating general mental health concerns. Any questions? I'm going to try. It's been really hard. I haven't been able to see anyone. I'm turning it on so I can actually see people's faces now.
I have a question.
Mhm.
So, disclaimer before I ask the question.
Mhm.
I think so many of these tactics work really well. So before I ask this question about like a hard scenario, I
Yeah.
want to explain that I know in my experience working with hundreds of clients, I can almost always get the amount of information I need by continually encouraging them that it's for a purpose,
Mhm.
and that ironically, suffering often is legally powerful.
Yeah.
And so many of the tactics you've talked about. One of the common themes in terms of like the pushback I get when
Mhm.
talking to clients is, we've already talked about this, Jennifer. Like, I gave you every detail, right? And there's a frustration a lot of times, which I
Oh yeah.
understand completely. But do you have any thoughts in how we can deal with that kind of frustration and just like the
Mhm.
fatigue, of talking
Yeah.
about this stuff so much?
Right. To me, I go back to empathy. Like, it's really like this. It's really hard to have to keep going over these details, and really frustrating, but also I'm sure it's really painful to have to continue reliving these things. And sometimes leaving it at that, or even going a little further and acknowledging kind of everything that they may be experiencing every time they go through these details, I think can be helpful. and kind of backing down. And then, of course, I'm sure you explain the purpose. And I think in these type of cases, especially if they have to go through immigration court, letting them know that one of the reasons that we're going through this so many times, or even with the asylum officer, if you get one who's kind of a little bit tough or not so nice, is that they're going to press hard. And I need to make sure I have everything as correct as possible. So when they press hard, you're okay talking about this. And when I work with clients and they might get frustrated or say, like, I've already told my attorney these things or whatnot, that the reason we have to repeat it so often is because it gives you practice at talking about these experiences without this frustration, right? Without the anger, and to help it not be so emotionally overwhelming because you've had this practice. So there's a couple different ways you can go about it, kind of depending on the source and depending on the case. Is that helpful?
It is. Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always try to lean into whatever the client's like. I mean, they're projecting like the anger and frustration, but kind of like, okay, what's going on? What's it like for them to have to relive these things like time after time after time?
Sure. Definitely. Any other questions?
I just have a question. I think that bell curve was really helpful, and a great framework. I'm wondering, and I haven't done as much of this kind of work, but it's in other kind of work with folks. I sometimes find that there's a pattern of I leave the big thing until the very end, right? And then all of a sudden your time is up and the big thing just came out. So how do you deal with that?
I think they call that like doorknob revelations in the therapy field. Like as you're walking out the door, and by the way, that's one of the reasons why I think the bell curve is so important, because you're wrapping up kind of that type of digging into stuff with a buffer. And so if it does come up, you have a little bit of time to maybe briefly address it. Like, that's really important information. Thank you so much. You know what? I want to make sure we have enough time to go through this. So I'm noting it here. We can definitely work on that part of your story at the next appointment. And if you have, like, I usually leave 15 to 20 minutes depending on my appointment, in which if your appointments are only an hour, that'd be kind of hard, but just depending on what you're going through with them that day, I leave enough time to where those last minute things can come up, but we can still kind of decompress before walking out the door. And also, if anyone's tried these things and they haven't worked, like, I would love to hear those experiences as well, because I'm not an attorney. Okay, I need therapy.
Yeah, definitely. So the bell curve, I like that as well, because I've done that, but having that visual will remind me to do it more. And I know there have been times when it's been so painful for clients, and I don't want them to just leave if it's in person or if it's on Zoom. So I'll just chat with them for a little bit just to kind of like hopefully help them reorient, like you said, and get them into a different frame of mind. I'm sorry if you can hear my child screaming. I don't know if that's
Oh no.
it's unusual. Sorry. But yeah, definitely the bell curve is very effective.
Good.
Any other questions? All right. Well, Aimee, thank you so much. Super helpful again. We really appreciate your time, and I will be in touch
Yep.
in
I forgot one
subsequent
thing.
years for sure. Yeah, go ahead.
The book I mentioned, if you're at the first one, the one I could not remember the name of, that talked about burnout, it's called Burnout: The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle.
Great. Perfect.
So that was a great book regarding, and really, if you have a very high stress, high pressured life and you're working with trauma survivors, it's a really excellent book to read or listen to. And like I said, you can just get through the first 2 chapters. It's really helpful.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. We appreciate you, Aimee. Thank you.
Yeah.
And
Take
thanks to
care.
everyone for coming out. Have a good night, and I'll stick around for anyone who wants to chat after.
Thank you.
I'll just stop the recording.